Welcome to the Rise to the Challenge podcast. Joined today, she's an actress, model, author, entrepreneur. It's Deborah Driggs. How you doing today, Deborah?
Thank you. I'm doing very well. Nice
We're,
intro. Very quick, right to the point.
yes, we're so excited to have you on the show to talk about your rise to the challenge. What we like to do with all of our guests is go right to the end. Talk about where you're from and what were you involved in growing up.
Yes, I'm a native LA girl, born and raised in California in the South Bay area. And I grew up ice skating. So that was kind of my first love and my first introduction into, you know, the the competition world, being competitive and kind of learning how to fail and get back up. I learned that at a very young age. And it was a lot different back then. You didn't give trophies to fourth, fifth, and sixth. It was like it was first and second, and sometimes you remembered who came in third, but it was a very different time, to grow up and to learn those kind of rules and those kind of lessons. And so I did that, that was my childhood. And I also went to private school. So, I was skating or I was going to school. I didn't have much of a typical, let's play after school type
Mhm.
of life because I went straight to the skating rink. I skated before and after school.
Wow.
And so I think the discipline in my life really came from those years of ice skating. That's where I got a lot of my really good life lessons.
Did you like that structure of where you were busy all the time, or did you wish that you kind of had that free time to maybe explore other fun things that you wanted to do?
I think that when you are on purpose and and I knew at a young age that I loved to skate and I knew that that's what I wanted to do. I loved performing. I didn't even think about it. It just, that seemed normal to me how I was living my life. So I didn't really know I didn't know if I was missing out. I thought I had such a great, routine
Mhm.
that, if I would overhear kids talk about, oh, this happened or, when they played or whatever. And I never felt like I was missing out. So I think that's due to the fact that I really loved what I was doing. I think that I think that for people that feel like they miss out on something, it's because they're not happy with what they're doing. And I think that rings true even as adults and even in today's world. When we're not really happy with what's going on here, we're looking somewhere
Yep.
else, right? And that's why social media, you have to be so careful with social media because everything looks a certain way, but it's not really the way it is. You know what I
Oh yeah,
mean? Yeah, so
you can definitely tell everything's like almost like a false facade in a way on social media. Where is it
yeah.
really? They only want you to see the good things, never the moments of vulnerability and things like that on social media, because it kind of gives that, oh, they're weak or kind of a bad taste in a way. And I think that's what people connect is if they can connect to that person, they're going to be more interested and want to learn more.
Absolutely. And so I just think that if we use things for the right reasons, then you know it comes across that way. But for me, it's the social media thing. It's really hard because you see things, but then the perception is different and the
Yep.
reality is different. And unfortunately, for a lot of people, they live by that and then they feel bad about their own stuff. So that's why I said if we're happy with what art we're doing and what I didn't have FOMO as a kid. I didn't feel like I was missing out because I felt like everything that was going on in my world was exactly where I was supposed to be.
As you're growing up, did you have a dream job or something that you wanted to pursue as a career?
I always looked at the things that seemed obvious. So when I was growing up, everybody talked about becoming a doctor or a lawyer.
Mhm.
There was never talk about being an entrepreneur,
Yeah.
like having your own business. Like nobody talked about it. It was always like some big, like you could be a doctor, like that seemed like, huge, or a lawyer. And I had a little fantasy about being a doctor. I was really fascinated with going to the doctor, and I was very sickly as a kid. I had pneumonia a lot, and I had certain things that where I was in the doctor's office a lot. So I was fascinated with it, and it seemed like a job that I like the thought of taking care of people. So
Mhm.
that's probably what I liked about that. But and for a long time I would tell people that I was going to be a doctor, and I loved, like I would get those toys as a kid, with the
Yep.
stethoscope, and I just was, like I said, very fascinated with that. But as I got older, for a while I thought I was going to be a teacher again, something, being of service. I picked those kind of jobs. um didn't really fall into entertainment and acting and all of that until my first year of college.
What was the first like branch that got you into like entertainment in those kind of fields?
Well, so the ice skating and the dancing growing up kind of put me in that performance arena.
Hmm.
And so in college, I was a song leader, and I was performing at football games and basketball games. And then I tried out for a professional football team, and I made the squad. And I was 19 years old. And because now I was a professional cheerleader, we were now doing interviews, and I was on the morning shows and on the radio shows, and I was being introduced to that world. And I thought, this is what I want to do. I want to be on TV. I want to do commercials. I want to like keep expanding. And so after that cheerleading, one of the girls that I cheered with said, we're going to go to Japan and dance. And I said, I want to go. How do I go? I was like, I had never been out of the country. I think I'd been out of the country once. When I was 14, my mom took my sister and I to England and to Spain. And so I had really never traveled. So I was like, I want to go to Japan. That just seemed like a really far away
Yeah.
adventure. And so she got me on this dance squad, and they sent my photo. And back then you had to mail everything. And so they sent my photo and, my stuff. And they said, yeah, we'll take, she can come. They sent me a ticket, and I ended up staying in Japan for 6 months. And while I was there, we danced at two different clubs. And dancing was huge in Japan back then. And one of the somebody came in to see our show, and they asked me if I would do a commercial dancing. And so I ended up doing commercials in Japan. I did two commercials, and I loved it. I loved being on the set. I loved the whole experience. So when I came back to the US, the first thing I did was sign up for a commercial workshop in Hollywood called Tepper Gallegos. And it was every week. And at the end of the 6 weeks or 8 weeks, they had these agents come in, and we did an improv. We did a commercial. They handed us a script. We did the commercial, and it was a great opportunity to see if there were any agents there. If they wanted you, they came up to you and said, we want to sign you. And I had 3 agents come up to me that night that were interested in signing me. And so I signed with Pacific Artists, and it was really exciting because I thought, oh my God, I have an agent, like who would have thought, And the thing that I remember the most about that time is I think I was around 22 at the time, and they sent me on an audition for a Japanese commercial. It was the very first audition, and it was just serendipitous that it was for Japan, and I booked it. And they were like, okay, we just signed her. The first thing we sent her on. Usually it takes like 50 auditions before you book something. And I just went in, and because now I could speak skoshidake,
Oh yeah.
So I wooed everybody in the room. I walked in, I was like, hajime meshite, and like, konnichiwa. And I was speaking, skoshidake, Japanese. And, and they loved that. And I had, the look that I had back then was what they were looking for. And it just everything kind of lined up. So now my agent had really even stronger confidence. So they sent me out all the time, and I had such a good run. And then I switched agencies and went with Sutton Barth and Benari, a little bit of a bigger agent, and so I did all this before, you know, this and modeling up until 1989 when Playboy came knocking.
How did that opportunity come about? Because going from acting, doing the commercials to going to modeling and going to even a big company of Playboy, how did that opportunity come about?
Yeah, I had an agent and her name was Vivian, and she called me and she said, Playboy is coming out with a book. It's called the Lingerie Book. And they saw your photo and they are very interested for you to come in and audition for the cover. And I said, well, is there any nudity involved? Because Playboy
Yeah.
and nudity goes together. And I was doing very wholesome girl next door stuff at this point. So she said, I don't think so, because they would have told me. And she said, no, I think, that there might be like a bikini shot type situation, but not for the cover. I said, great, I'll go. So I go to the famous building on Sunset Boulevard and I auditioned for this cover of the lingerie book. And the funny thing is when I got there, they wanted me to take everything off and put on a robe to go in the studio and do a Polaroid. And I said, oh, no, 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 I'm not here for that. I'm here for the cover of the lingerie book. And they said, well, everything we do, has some type of nudity. We need to see your body. And back then, so this would have been 1989, you did have, whenever you did a swimsuit audition, you had to do the audition, obviously, in a bikini. But what they were looking for was birthmarks, tattoos, piercings, scars. That was a big thing back then. The makeup now has advanced. It's much easier to cover those things. But back then, that was a big deal. That was going to take work to cover those situations. And so I left on my undergarments. I did the Polaroid. I left. And I literally thought to myself, this is not for me. And, I always had a feeling when I left an audition, whether or not I was going to get it or if I had a chance. And with that, I literally was like, this is so not for me, and left and didn't think about it. But when I got home, I had a message on my machine from Marilyn Karbowski, who was the editor-in-chief of Playboy. And she literally said, I saw your Polaroids and we want to test you for a centerfold. And I was like, what? They completely are mixing me up with somebody else. And I said, are you sure? Because, first I called my agent and she's like, no, it's true. So I called Marilyn back and I said, this is Deborah. I just listened to your message. Are you sure you have the right person? I didn't think that audition went so well. She said, no, it's absolutely, yeah, we're very interested. Looking back, it's funny because the magazine really represented a lot of blondes. And I think when a brunette came along that maybe had potential to be a centerfold, they were like, a brunette, because if you really look throughout the decades and stuff, it's really blonde heavy, and so I thought, well, maybe it's because I'm brunette. I just did not, and then of course, then I have to call the people that are closest to me. And I'm like, do you think I should do this? And in 1989, Playboy was the #1 magazine in the world. So of course, everybody was like, oh my God, you have to do it. It's so sexy. And oh my God, you'll get to meet Hugh Hefner. And, everybody's reaction was different. So I rolled the dice. My agent and I actually had the biggest conversation because she said, look, it's going to change everything. Because I was doing like the Sunday paper ads, the wholesome girl next door for Macy's. She said, you're not going to get those jobs anymore because once you did Playboy back then, it changed everything. And so I took a gamble, with it. And I have to say, looking back, there's always good and bad to every situation. For the most part, I don't look back with any regret. I just think, it was a part of history and it's something that I did. But this was also before the internet.
Yeah.
This was before you could Google anybody. I didn't know what that was. And I didn't have in my mind that one day somebody would Google me and there would be all my photos. I thought this was a one and done. If you were a fan, you collected it and that would be it. So I had I didn't, I thought it was fascinating when in the late 90s and early 2000s, all of a sudden people could Google, and now, I have people saying, did you do Playboy? So if I regretted anything, it's that I didn't have the knowledge. I don't know how I would, but that I would have made it more clear in my contract that this is just for Playboy, that Playboy owns the photos just for Playboy
Mm-hmm.
and for Playboy's books, but not, now Playboy was selling all of our photos. When the internet blew up, they found a way to make a lot of money by selling our photos. And so all of a sudden, my photos were being associated to a lot of websites that were not anything to do with Playboy. It was, I all of a sudden it looked like I was doing porn. These photos were showing up on porn sites. So it was like they were using my photo to drag people into a porn site. And so in 2011, I kind of had enough, and I went to Playboy's legal department. I said, look, I did Playboy in 1989, and now for some reason, all my photos are being used to guide people into really dark websites. And they said, well, they really shouldn't be. Can you send us all the links? So I spent like a month.
Oh.
Every link that I was linked to and sending it to Playboy Legal. And for the most part, 80% were taken down.
Wow.
Because once Playboy sent a letter to those, because a lot of them were just, it got out of control is what happened. Maybe have sold it to certain companies, but then those companies are selling it to other companies. And before you know it, you have all these beautiful Playboy photos being used in the wrong way. So I was getting calls from people saying, did you do this porno? And I said, look, click on my photo. I guarantee you I disappear. It's a photo that's being used to bring you into the site, and it worked. So that took about 6 months to a year. And finally that kind of faded out, really. I think I haven't really checked lately, but yeah, that was kind of a problem, because I thought, there went that wholesome girl next door to kind of it being a little bit of an issue. And so thank God Playboy took the right, and I said, are there any other girls complaining about this? There were a few of us, but for me, it was kind of a big deal, because I was at that time in my life in the business world. And so I didn't want my name being associated with these dark websites. I thought, no, this is not true. It's very false. So yeah, so that took a while. And even today, I mean, things will pop up. It's like weeds. You take one out and then 10 more pop up. And so it's really hard to navigate that. But I did, I tried the best I could. It would cost a lot of money to really nip it in the bud.
Being in that limelight, did it ever take a toll on you personally? Did it, like, having that big exposure, that kind of career growing each and every like opportunity you got, did it ever take a toll on you personally?
Yeah, it did, because I'm a person that I get easily anxious, and, I suffer with a little anxiety and nervousness. So I would say, yeah, there were times that, I just would want to just kind of like isolate and shut down a little bit. And you can't do that, if, and I was really young, and I didn't know that that's what I suffered from at the time. I just thought I was tired, or I just thought, but I could remember being on certain sets or being in certain environments and just feeling very anxious. And, you always have to be on, when you get into certain environments or rooms or auditions, and you have to be on a lot. And so that can be really wearing, especially if you're somebody who suffers from, anxiety once in a while. It's like that can be really draining. So yeah, it takes a toll. And I would say that, the preparation to auditioning to getting the job, all the stuff that happens kind of behind the scenes, that's all the stuff that can be very wearing and very draining. It all looks great once you have a job and you work on a film, or you work on a TV, or you work on a pilot, you work on a commercial, and you see the end result. It all looks great. But what goes on behind that, and what it takes to get to that point, I think is the part that's very wearing. Because a lot of stuff goes into that. A lot of rehearsal, a lot of
Yeah.
preparing and all of that stuff. So yeah, it definitely, I don't think I really realized that actually until probably after I had kids. And then I realized, I was going on auditions and then trying to take care of young, I had toddlers. And I remember it was around 1998, 1999, and I did a TV show called I can't think of it now, Nightstand. And it was a funny show. It was like a spoof on talk shows. And I had a lot of dialogue, and it was like, I had 3 babies at home, and I'm rehearsing to do this. And I remember after I did that show, I just thought, I don't know if I can keep this momentum up. It was really hard to audition with kids, and then, and then you book the job and you have to give it your all. And
Yep.
so, yeah, it could be very wearing.
Was that the big moment that you were ready for that next chapter, that next experience to go on for yourself?
Yeah, I think, I think I thought, I don't know that this would be fair to my kids also, because it it takes a lot out of me. So imagine if it takes a lot out of me, that's taking a lot out of my kids, because I believe in that kind of energy. What I'm bringing to the kids is, and so I thought, this is really wearing on me. It's got to be wearing on them. So yeah, it was a big decision. So really, I kind of took a step back and only auditioned for things that I knew would not be too, like, I still auditioned for commercials, or back then infomercials were really big, and industrials, and things that you could go and work on and be done. But to do something regularly, I just thought that, as nice as it would have been financially, it wasn't good as a mother.
So when was the first time that you got out of the entertainment industry?
I don't know that I've ever been completely out. Even when I was working in business, I'd still every once in a while go on an audition, and I was still doing industrials. Even when I lived in Park City for about 6 years. I raised my kids there for a while, and I was with talent management group there. I was with an agent, and I would still do industrials and commercials and infomercials and things like that. But I was also selling real estate, and I was working for Park City TV. I did their Mountain Morning Show, which was a 2-hour unscripted morning show. And so I don't think I ever got out.
Mm-hmm.
Even these things aren't really popular, and you wouldn't find me on TV. I was still doing work in that business.
It sounds like you like that kind of creativity kind of aspect of it.
I absolutely do. I absolutely do. And it fulfills that performance need in me, because I know when you've been doing something your whole life, and for me, it's not about acting or modeling. It's that performance, being, whether it's on the ice or cheerleading or doing a commercial, it's that performance bug. It's like, it feels good to just do something creative. I did a movie last year, a very small part, and I didn't mind. I just liked being on the set. I just thought, because I hadn't been on a film set in years, and it just felt good to be on the set and have that creativity, like you said, that creative juice flowing, and like watching other people do what they're great at. And there's just something about that, you miss it when you're not around it. And so it's kind of hard to leave for good, if you know what I mean.
I was going to say, sometimes when you haven't done something in such a long time, when you get that first opportunity, you're like, yes, where do I sign up? Because
yes. And that's how this was. It was somebody that knew me, and they said, look, we'd love you to play the part of the mom. And, there was no money. And I just said, I'd love to. I felt honored that, just the fact that anybody would want me on the set, now when I kind of haven't really been in the audition arena, it just felt really good. And I thought, of course, yes.
Kind of a fun question. Is there that dream opportunity that you wish you maybe got to experience, or something that maybe if you had the opportunity, you would want to do that? A movie, a TV show, a modeling gig, something fun. It's hard because there's so much out there, but what would that fun
Oh my gosh.
opportunity
Well,
be
if I
for you?
was 5'9" or 5'10", I would have lived for the runway. I love watching fashion shows. So that would have been just a fun, it's work, I know, but it's still, that would have been something really fun. I would say that the thing that I probably regret not doing is theater.
Okay.
Because in the early 90s, I was really studying, and I wish I would have taken the opportunity back then to get on stage,
Mhm.
and do some acting live on stage.
I mean, you still have the opportunity to do that. You
Absolutely.
never know
Yeah.
nowadays.
You never know.
As an author, how did you start coming up with the idea that you wanted to write a book?
So it's always I've always liked to write from a very young age. That was kind of what I loved the most in school, was writing, in English writing.
Mhm.
But I've always written, I'm one of those people that always writes. I have journals, you know, everywhere. And so in 2019, I was kind of at a business mastery convention. And while I was sitting there, I just, in my head, started thinking about writing a book. And I thought, stop thinking about it and do it.
Mhm.
And so I started out by writing a weekly blog, just to see if my writing would resonate with anybody. And I committed to myself to write a blog a week. So every week I posted a blog for 52 weeks. And the response was really cool. And I realized that, I had something to say. And so through that, I was asked to write a chapter in this book, Here Comes the Sun. So this just came out July 7th, and my chapter is on page 32. And I share my journey. So this is my chapter. I share my journey with addiction and recovery, and suffering quietly, basically, is what the chapter's about. And so I suffered for years with addiction and that. And so when I was offered to write a chapter in the book, somebody sent me a message because they read my blog, and they said, would you mind writing about this for a chapter in this book? And it's kind of like a chicken soup for the soul, this book.
Mhm.
It's like all these women that wrote a chapter, and the theme is being in the dark, coming into the light. That's why it's called Here Comes the Sun. And so I talked about the darkness of being in an addiction and then coming out of it, and what that looks like, and about relapsing and falling back into that addiction and coming out. Like, that's happened to me a few times. So that was that. And then the other project is, and this one's coming out in October, Son of a Basque. This was a labor of love. This was a book that was in a box that my grandfather wrote. And he passed in 1998, and my grandmother died in 2017. And when we were cleaning out her garage and cleaning everything out in her house, I found this box with this book. And I asked her, I said, could I have this? And she said, at this point, she didn't care. He wrote it back in the late 80s, maybe, was when he wrote it. And you can tell by the way it was typed, and it was all out of order. So I shipped it back she lived in Florida. I shipped it back to California, and it sat. And in the end of 2018, I took it out of the box and tried to make sense of it. And as I was doing that, I was fascinated by my grandfather's life. 70% of the things that were written in this book, I didn't even know about.
Wow.
So then I started writing blogs about it, because when I got on my blog writing journey, I wrote about that. I said, it's so important that we really learn about our grandparents. And if we're lucky enough, I had great grandparents when I was younger. Can you imagine the information I could have gotten if I would have taken the time to really learn about their life and their parents and their grandparents?
Yep.
I mean, I just like all of a sudden realized by working on this book, if I could just have one more day to talk to my grandfather, because he worked at San Quentin. He was a prison guard. I didn't know that.
Oh, wow.
How much trauma is involved with some of the stuff that he wrote about. And, I really believe in that generational trauma, gets passed down. And sometimes we have this, like I said, I suffer with anxiety and nervousness. And sometimes we suffer with stuff we don't even know where it comes from. Like, a lot of people say, if you ask them, where does that come from? They'll go, I don't know.
Yeah.
Because they really don't. It's like energy. And so I got more fascinated about that, about this generational trauma. Like when we go to the doctor and we have to fill out medical forms and it says, do you have any family history of diabetes or heart disease? Or they don't ask, do you have family disease of trauma? And, what about, did anybody have suicidal thoughts? Did anybody have addiction? None of that is asked. And so I thought about it a lot so basically what I did is I did a lot of editing and a little bit of rewriting. I wanted to keep it as authentic to his writing as I could, but some of it had to be changed because some of it didn't quite make sense. And we had to make sure all the characters lined up. So once I did that, then I sent it to an editor. Then I formed a publishing company so I could publish the book. So it really becomes about two really valuable messages. Is one, write things down.
Yep.
Because this is valuable to me and to my family and, to future generations to know, like, I don't know, maybe 4 generations from now, they're going to read this and go, wow, it really got me thinking. And so now, of course, I had written a book in 2020. And so after I finished this project, I went back and kind of rewrote stuff that I had written in my book, because I thought, well, now I really want to be careful about what I am leaving behind for generations to come. When my kids have kids and their kids have kids, they have, it's so cool. They can go, well, this was her grandfather. This was her, this, you know what I mean? And so it kind of got me excited about, we have all these websites now, ancestry.com and, all these websites you can go to find out more about where you're from and where you are from culturally. Like I had no idea when I did that test how much I have a lot of Scottish in me, and I can't figure out where in my family that's coming from. But if I would have interviewed my grandparents when they were living, I probably could have matched that all up somehow.
Yeah.
So I think it's so fascinating. And if I could leave anybody with anything from this podcast, it's go interview your family, go interview your relatives, find out what it was like for them growing up, what it was like for them going to school, what it was like for them having relationships, what their parents were like, what their grandparents were like. Get that information, because oh my gosh, for me to be like in my 50s and find this and go, what? Like just his whole experience in World War II. This was a man that, fought for America, and he was, he had to fight, against all the odds. They wanted to put him because he spoke fluent Spanish, his English wasn't that great. They wanted to, back then they put, if you didn't speak English and you were kind of an immigrant, they would make you like work in the kitchen or work as cleanup or whatever. He didn't want that. He wanted to be a tail gunner and he wanted to fight in the war. And so he, like, against all the odds, did all that. And it's a really, really cool journey, to go on with somebody, and he was very proud of his Basque heritage, and not a lot of people know about the Basque country. And so that's why it's called Son of a Basque. And so, it was fascinating for me. I didn't know that his father was a bullfighter. Like,
Oh,
what?
wow.
Yeah. So I am telling you, we think we know people in our lives.
Yep.
And we're not, I just feel like we need to be more curious, and we need to be more excited about, even if we're not if we don't get along with people in our family, even if we don't feel like we have a relationship with them, we should still try to find out all this great information. Because if I had known that this was going to be something I'd be so passionate about, oh my God, I would have known my grandparents so much better.
I love that you talked about finding information and learning, because even when I was growing up doing like grandparents day, and I got to interview my grandfather, and I learned all about him in Poland and him being a fencer and things that I never knew. It was so interesting, and I thought we shared a bond even more learning about that stuff. And you just hearing you share the information that you learned, it sounds like that kind of felt like you learned even more and got closer in that information that you learned.
So much closer. I had so much more admiration. I have so much more respect. There was, like I said, he was involved in all three wars, World War II, the Korean War, and Vietnam. And I also recognized where I got my passion for being of service from, because before I read this, I was on a trip in 2014. I went to Peru with a group to look at all these schools that, have no money, and it's with this uh, campaign called Go Campaign, and they raise monies to give, help schools that are underfunded, that don't have any funding. And so we went to go look at this school in Peru, and I ended up adopting the school and, sending them money every month. And so cut to, then I read this book, and my grandfather had set up in Vietnam a whole thing where he had all his friends in America sending clothes for kids, and books and things, and he set up a whole thing for this orphanage in Vietnam. So all these people were sending clothes for the kids in Vietnam. And I was reading this going, well, that's where I get that from, and I had no idea. I had no idea that, so it's very fascinating. So yeah, I learned a lot about the good and the bad, and then I realized, all the trauma that he held in, being involved in three wars, working working as a prison guard, seeing things that no human being should see. And he saw a lot in his lifetime. And so then that helped me to understand really him. It helped me to understand his three kids, which is my mother and her two brothers. It helped me to understand how my relationships with that part of my family developed because of certain things that happened to him. So, and that's just one grandparent. Imagine if I knew stuff about all of my grandparents, if I knew the things that they suffered with, or the traumas they had, or whatever. Like, I know a little bit about his wife, my grandmother. She was born in England. She lost her parents at a very young age. She was raised by her granny, and she suffered with a little addiction. I remember as a kid her being, the pill popper and the kleptomaniac, and she had her little secret life going on. But I wish I would have known more. Why? Where did that come from? What happened in London? She used to run bets for granny. They used to run bet, she used to run down and, like, as a kid, run bets. And you wish, when it's too late, that you had this information, this really cool information. So Yeah, I would say get that information. It's so, so important. And, you know, I got just this experience of putting this book together, and it was really not for any reason. You know, I didn't look at it as, oh, I hope it becomes a bestseller. I never even thought of it that way. I thought of it as something to leave behind.
Yep.
Because, you know, history leaves clues.
Mm-hmm.
And also we can learn. It helps us to grow as humans when we can learn from the mistakes of our past generations, you know? So anyway, this book is available on my website. There's a link, and I made it available so people can read a chapter for free. They can pre-order the book, and, you know, I'll have a sense of how, you know, when the book is available. I think it comes out October 25th. And I'll have a sense, you know, if I'm going to make it into a hardcover as well. But right now it's paperback, it's pre-order. And if you want to read a chapter, you can go to my website and read a chapter. I know that we have over 20 testimonials. And because I have some friends in the entertainment world, I sent it to some people that I really respect. And the feedback was just like, wow, you know, like, so I got some really great feedback. You can read all the testimonials at my website, and it's just been really cool. And the fun thing about it is when it really started to become a book, you know, when I was like, oh, it's really happening, then my mom got motivated and she wrote a book.
Oh,
yeah. So
well,
that's kind of what happens. It becomes like this snowball effect, you know, when you see like, this is really important stuff, you
yeah.
know, to really write these things down. And it's the reason why I journal. I journal almost every day, you know. It may not seem like anything at the time, but I promise you, when I go back and read journals from 2 years ago, I go, who's that person? You know, it's good to see our own growth.
Yep.
You know, not just, you know, it's hard to see, you know, sometimes I think we can get really hard on ourselves because we can't see our growth. So it's nice to have a journal to go back and look at and go, wow, look what I was thinking 2 years ago. And I don't even think that way now. I think more like this. Or we can see the changes in ourselves, you know, when we keep track. And so it's a beautiful thing to keep track. And it's what I love now. You know, I thought I was only going to do the blog for a year. I wrote another year of blogs just because it became such a habit and I love doing it. It doesn't make any money. It doesn't have any type of satisfaction to me. What it does, it's like me being of service, because when I get emails from people, when they read my blog and they go, oh my God, I'm going through this right now, or this happened
Yep.
to me, or then I go, oh my God, I have to write about that again, you know, or I have to write about it in deeper because it's really affecting people.
So, what does the future look like for you? What are you hoping to accomplish in the next few years, both personally and professionally?
It's a great question. It's a great question. And I think about that often. So, where do I want to be in 6 months? Where do I want to be in a year? Where do I want to be in 5 years? Because I think when we really look at those chunks of time, they go so fast, you
Yes.
know. And I even ask my kids this all the time, you know, because they're young. I go, you know, always have in the back of your mind, where do you want to be in 6 months? Where do you want to be in a year? And where do you want to be in 5 years? Really think about it and write it down. And then when you get to those marks, look back and see if you've even made any progress. It's so important. So for me, my goal right now is to really finish my book and feel confident enough to have it published. You know, that's my 6 months goal. My year goal would be then to have it in that process. And I think my 5-year goal, there's a couple things. I think I really see myself working with people. And so I've been developing this 90-day program of healing for people who really want to heal from something that's hard to heal from. that you can't go to a raw seminar to heal, something that you want to do in private, that you don't really want to be in a big group of people.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm developing something right now with all the tools that I use, really, and how I really kind of got to where I got with my healing. So I'm developing that now. I could see myself working with groups of people like this, just on Zoom, and with 20 to 25, maybe 30 people. So that's kind of in the back of my mind, is developing a 90-day program. And I think the other thing is maybe at some point to do a podcast myself, like a healing podcast.
I can definitely see the program, because just from the time we've shared, the big thing is you like to help others. And I
Yeah,
think that's a characteristic that's so huge, and it's valuable and inspiring, the things that you talked about, where the acts of service is such a big thing, where people feel that ashamed that's what they like to do. But to me, I love doing those kind of things. If I can go spend an hour at a community shelter or a food pantry and just help and give back to the community, to me, it makes my day, because I get to meet amazing people. I get to enjoy the time, and it's not for me, it's for other people to benefit
absolutely.
from.
And I guarantee while you're doing those things, when you're there and you're working at the shelter and you're engaging with people that have something much harder they're going through, I guarantee you're not thinking about yourself.
Nope.
You're not thinking
Yep.
about some silly problem that you were probably thinking about before you got there. Like there's something about getting out of ourself. I
Yeah.
know if I sit too long in my own thoughts, that's a problem. But when I get on, a meeting with somebody else, or somebody calls me that maybe needs help with something, I'm no longer thinking about my thoughts or something it becomes irrelevant. The other thing I find really fascinating is people ask me all the time, well, what do you do in those times of like real deep stress or real deep? And there's two things that come to my mind right off the bat. So moving my body, I have to, if I sit in something, that just makes it worse.
Mm-hmm.
So if I'm really feeling something, and the thing that the obvious thing to do is to sit in it and try and fix it, right?
Yep.
But really, you have to do the contrary. You have to put it down for 24 hours and go for a walk, or do yoga, or do something, ride the bike, do something that you're not thinking about it. And then make 3 phone calls to people that you maybe haven't called in a while, not to help you with your problem, but just to get you away from your problem.
Yes.
And I have found, by doing those contrary actions, those things that really don't make sense when you're in something and you really want to fix something, or you're dwelling on something, those contrary actions to what I want to do, if I do that and I take 24 hours to not think about it, I guarantee when I go back after those 24 hours, it doesn't look as harsh.
Yep.
It toned down, and it's more doable. Trying to fix anything in the first few moments of something, it just usually doesn't work out. It usually makes it worse. So I've written that if you go to my website, I wrote a blog called the 24-hour rule, and it's really just about that. It's taking 24 hours with anything, whether it's a relationship, you're having a hard time with just take 24 hours to come back to it with a new lens,
Define.
and
Oh.
yeah, before making any major decisions. Now it's a rule I have, it's written on my board. No major decisions unless you sleep on it, 24 hours. It's a 24-hour rule. I wrote a blog about it. Anything you're struggling with, if you're struggling with the end of a relationship, heartbreak, I have 52 blogs that literally I cover just about every, there's so much more I can write about, but I covered a lot of stuff that it's basically from my journal. It's stuff that when
Yeah.
I start to write, I go, this should be a blog, because I'm dealing with it.
And a lot of other people have similar
Well, that's what I'm
stories,
saying.
experiences.
I get that email. Oh my God, this is exactly what I'm dealing with right now. Then it just inspires me to just write another blog.
Yep.
Yeah.
The final question I'll ask you, for someone that's listening to this interview based on your journey and experience, what tips or advice would you give them to overcome obstacles, accomplish their goals, and rise to the challenge?
Repeat that one more time.
For someone that's listening to this interview based on your journey and experience, what tips or advice would you give them to overcome obstacles, accomplish their goals, and rise to the challenge?
Beautiful question. I had to hear it one more time.
Thank you.
Okay. So to overcome obstacles just means that you're on the right path. If you have obstacles, if you have challenges, if you have problems, then you're doing something right. You're doing something right. And how to overcome all that, for me, it was in my darkest, lowest failures is where the growth began. So anytime now, when I feel like there is a failure or there is a challenge, I go, wow, I'm on to something. So I'm going to learn something quick here, right? Yep. So problems, challenges, obstacles, these are all really good. Start looking at those as positives because it means that you're on the right path. Keep going.
Yep.
Keep going. And my biggest tip is to write about those challenges, write about those obstacles, write about those problems, write about it. Because usually what happens is once we get it down on paper, it lessens the impact of it. So write it down so that you can always look back to see if you are progressing. When you write your obstacles down, when you write those problems down or something that you're challenged with, you write it down, say, I'm being really challenged by this right now. And you write all about it. How beautiful is it that you could go back and look at that months later and see if you're still challenged with it or if you progressed, if you grew. And then I would say if those obstacles are still appearing, then we've got to change and shift. We've got to shift course. We've got to try something new. If that fails, try something new. There's an abundance today of ways to do things. There's not just, those days are over of, it just being this or this. We have so many tools available, and find somebody that you can have as a mentor, whether you know them or not. A lot of people that I look to for advice, I don't even know. Some I do know, but others I don't. I have a lot of people that I follow, that I read their stuff. And it's always good to be in proximity of 5 people that are doing what you want to do.
Yep.
The other tip I will give is never take advice from somebody that is not living the life that you want to live. If they're not living the life, if they don't have the relationship that you want, if they're not making the money or working in the environment that you want to work in, be very careful who you take advice from. I have had this experience over and over throughout my life, and I've made the mistake of kind of listening to people that have absolutely zero clue to giving advice with something they know nothing about or they've never done. So for example, if I'm going to go to somebody on advice on how to write a bestseller, I'm going to go to somebody who's written a bestseller.
Yep.
It's amazing to me how many people go for advice to people who have never written a bestseller for advice on how to do that. And by the way, this is, it can be used in any context. I see people go for advice on relationships. Women do this especially, at lunches, they'll all talk about their relationships with the husbands, with the boyfriends, with the partners, whatever. And sometimes I find it amazing that women kind of get into this thing about their relationships. And I think to myself, why would you listen to anybody who's struggling in their relationship?
Yeah.
So for me, when I want to get, if I want to get relationship advice, I am going to look to somebody who's got the relationship thing down, or read a book with somebody who struggled with a relationship and made it work, where somebody has some really valid information. So just, yeah, that's probably one of my biggest tips at my age, because I've made the mistake of like jumping on bandwagon, so to speak, or listening to people that didn't have a great relationship for relationship advice or business advice or money advice. Like, why would I listen to them? They're not living the life that I want. So that's probably my number one tip.
Well, Deborah, I want to thank you so much for coming on the show and talking about your rise to the challenge. You're inspiring so many people, and we're excited to see what the future looks like for you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you for allowing me this time. And if anybody wants to find me, they can go to my website. I'm sure you'll put that in the show notes. But yeah, my website is my name, DeborahDriggs.com. All the links are there. And if you go and sign up for my newsletter, I have a free gift for everyone who signs up for my newsletter. It is, I can show you what it is. So on my phone, oh, won't go away. Hold on. Trying to get it so I can show you. I have these little, I don't know if you can see it, but I have these little screen where it says, you know, my den is a place, you know, they're little.
Oh, okay, I see it.
Yeah, they're little screensavers, and I made a whole bunch of different ones, and they're free. You can download them. And so there's that. And then if you sign up for my newsletter, you'll get it every week, and it'll tell you about books, upcoming podcasts, upcoming live events, and all of that with all the books that I have coming up.